And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another dejected episode of the Assembly Call as your Indiana Hoosiers just laid a complete egg at home, losing to the Fort Wayne Mastodons for the second season in a row, 92-72. We talked about on the postgame show after the IU Notre Dame game, the chances of a potential letdown with this game coming just 48 hours later. But I think even in our worst nightmares and the worst possible scenario that we could draw up, I don't think we could have envisioned basically a reprisal of the Indiana State game, but a lot worse because this wasn't the first game for a new coach. This team has had time to play together and get used to the new system. And so all of the excuses that we could use after the Indiana State game, you don't really have in this game, not to mention you lost to this team last year, so you shouldn't have taken them lightly and played without a lot of energy. But that's exactly what we saw tonight, and it was one of the more disappointing performances by an IU team that I can remember, and especially coming on the heels of what was such an impressive performance on Saturday, a team that showed so much fight and so much grit. Basically, none of that was there tonight. And we are going to break it all down for you here on this episode of the Assembly Call. I am your host, Jerod Morris. I will be joined by Andy Bottoms. Ryan Phillips is not here, but surely you can find him on Twitter somewhere saying, "I told you so" about the letdown, because he certainly was adamant that he thought that it was a likelihood, and it definitely was. But before we start breaking down all the negative elements of tonight's game, and there were many, let's start the show as we start every show, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And certainly some games are a lot easier to find banner moments than others, and I was definitely stressing coming down the stretch for this one, trying to figure out what to say. Do we cancel the banner moment? Do I really, really stretch to find something? Well, then Zach McRoberts drained a three with 50.2 seconds left. It cut the lead to 18. And I'm going with that as my banner moment. Number one, because it gives me a chance to talk about Zach McRoberts, who I thought at least went out there and played with the usual effort that you expect from Zach McRoberts. Unfortunately, a lot of his teammates didn't follow suit, but he at least brought the effort and the grit and the energy. But unfortunately, he was also infected with some of the poor turnovers and some of the poor decision-making that his teammates had. But on the bright side, Zach scored 9 points tonight. And I think him making that three-pointer and the little, mid-range jump shot that he made, I do think those are important developments, because I think as this game showed, and certainly as the Notre Dame game showed, he's a guy who's going to be playing minutes. Because look, when you have two performances like what we just saw back-to-back against Notre Dame and here against Fort Wayne, it's really hard to know what to count on. And there's not a lot from game to game that Archie can count on. Obviously, you're getting production from Juwan Morgan, but Zach McRoberts, his energy and effort is one of the few things that can be counted on. But the problem is he is so limited offensively and really hurts the team in that way. But for him to come in tonight, be able to score 9 points, make that three, hopefully that builds some confidence. And hopefully now that's on tape, and maybe future opponents have to respect that a little bit. So there were not many positives from this game, but I thought that was the one thing I take from it that hopefully can kind of help this team moving forward as they look to pick up the pieces from this loss and try to get some positive momentum going in this season again. Our banner moment, as always, brought to you by our friends at Hoosier Proud, an Indiana-based T-shirt and apparel company that is by Hoosiers for Hoosiers. And if you want to know why, you should check out their website, HoosierProud.com. Let me give you a few reasons. Number one, they have great designs. So they have officially licensed IU gear. They have the designs that they're known for, that they kind of made a splash for when they first came out, inspired by unique elements of the Hoosier State. And they also have our Assembly Call logo T-shirts there as well. And I was on HoosierProud.com earlier today picking up Christmas gifts for members of our team and kind of friends of the show. Bought some shirts, bought a coffee mug. So they've got a lot of really cool things there. And the checkout process is really, really simple. So that's, I guess, a fourth reason, because I still have two more reasons to talk about. Number two is their philanthropy. Hoosier Proud donates a portion of the revenue from their T-shirt sales to specific Indiana-based charities. And the third reason to go to HoosierProud.com is their generosity. Because you are an Assembly Call listener, they will give you 15% off your entire order. Just use the promo code ASSEMBLY at checkout, ASSEMBLY, and you will get 15% off your entire order. A great option if you're looking for Christmas gifts here last minute. Go to HoosierProud.com. All right, well, it is time to move the ball, find the open man, and get some opening thoughts from the rest of our team, which tonight is one man. He's a world-renowned bracketologist, the president of the Robert Johnson fan club, although it'll be interesting to see how the fan club is feeling after tonight's performance from Robert Johnson. He is Andy Bottoms. His Bottoms line is brought to us by iustore.shop. Andy, your Bottoms line on tonight's Indiana loss.
I mean, just take any of your biggest fears about things that could go wrong for this team and then amplify them by about 50 or 100 times what you'd think they would be. You want turnovers? I'll give you turnovers. You got 18 turnovers that led to 29 points. You want giving up wide open 3-point shots? Okay, well, let's see. I'll see that and raise you 17 for 30 3-point shooting for the game, 10 of 17 in the second half, and that was with missing some down the stretch for Fort Wayne. You want poor 3-point shooting from IU and getting sucked into a game that they had no business trying to play and out shooting them. 4 of 24 for 3 for the game, including 1 of 13 in the second half. That McRoberts 3-pointer was I think that moved IU up to 1 for 12 in the half. I mean, it was just everything that this team that scares you about this team, everything that is a flaw for this team, just amplified. And it was amplified by the way they played. It was amplified by what seemed to be just a lack of caring at times by some of these guys who would just repeatedly turn the ball over. And it was just so many old habits right back on display. And for the, huge step forward that the Notre Dame game felt like, this feels like an even bigger step back. And I think it ultimately reinforces the flaws of this roster and this team. And I don't, I think people on Twitter were saying, oh, if this was Tom Crean, people would be blaming him. I think certainly Archie deserves some blame, for this scenario. These guys did not the first few minutes. I actually thought they played fairly well. And then after that, it was all downhill from there. And it was really just hanging on, even to be up 1 at the half felt like a positive, with Morgan having sat most of the first half and not really getting to play. And so you kind of felt like, oh, maybe they would be able to come out and do something in the second half where they had, kind of shaken some of the rust off and some of those kinds of things. And it was the exact opposite. They just continued to let Fort Wayne get wide open 3-pointers. And for a team that hadn't shot them very well coming into the season, it's really easy to gain confidence when no one is guarding you and you're getting multiple uncontested looks. And that was, like you said, it was Indiana State, but worse. And I'm not sure that you felt like it could have been worse, but it was a carbon copy of that game. It felt like, where, inability to, kind of pick and pop situations, be able to recover to shooters, and just wide open shot after wide open shot. And it was a extremely disappointing performance. I mean, I know we'll get into the particulars. I know you mentioned Robert Johnson. I'm sure we'll talk about that. I thought he started the game well and then disappeared for about 30 minutes. And I don't think he was alone. It felt like one of those games where under other circumstances, you would say yank everybody out and just play, sit these guys, bench these guys. And then you got to the fact of like, well, that means I actually have to play someone. And I'm not really sure who that would have been in this game.
Yeah. All right. You're listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms. We are breaking down Indiana's 92-72 loss to Fort Wayne. And, a couple things. What I was going to say for the banner moment before Zach McRoberts hit that 3 is the banner moment is that the Fort Wayne series is over. We don't have to play them anymore. Because, these last 2 seasons, talk about just being able to just kill momentum in your season. Indiana number 3 last year. Fort Wayne wins. At least Indiana, took that game to overtime, and tonight just an absolute shellacking. So good riddance, Fort Wayne, but also congratulations to Fort Wayne, because those guys have really come out. They played their game plan tonight, and they were much more confident in what they were doing. They were much more connected as a team. They played harder, and they deserve to win this game. There's no question about it. I think you can certainly say, okay, they shot better than they have. They were 17 of 30 from downtown. All right, fine. And maybe if they don't just shoot lights out, they only win by 10. But either way, they came in and whooped Indiana's butt at Simon Scott Assembly Hall. And it takes 2 to do that. It takes Indiana to not play well. Indiana certainly did that. But it also takes Fort Wayne to take advantage of it. And, guys like Kaysen Harrell, Bryson Scott, John Conchar, Conchar only had 16 points, but I thought the threes that he hit in the second half were just daggers and just kind of, made it so Indiana didn't have any life. Because Indiana was up 40-36 in the second half, early in the half, and then Fort Wayne just systematically just took Indiana apart. They won every sequence in the second half, every 4-minute sequence, 7-5, 18-9, 11-6, 10-7, 10-8. And again, for an Indiana team that prides itself on that grit and that toughness, and that we saw in the Notre Dame game, that was what was so impressive about that comeback, is that every time Notre Dame pushed it to 9 or pushed it out to 14, Indiana would come charging right back. And there was none of that tonight in the second half. It was just Fort Wayne putting pressure on Indiana, making shots, and you're kind of waiting for Indiana to respond, and it just never happens. And there were moments, and we'll get to some of these in the meaningful moments that you might have missed, but moments where it looked like Indiana had a chance to kind of get some momentum, and then they would shoot themselves in the foot with a turnover, not hustle after a loose ball, and it was just one thing after another. So, so many things that we need to break down tonight. But Andy, let's talk about Robert Johnson, because, I thought early in the game, Fort Wayne goes on that 9-2 run. They take that 11-8 lead. And really, Juwan Morgan and Deron Davis were struggling a bit early. Archie takes them out, and we've got that weird lineup in there where it's Robert Johnson, Devontae Green, Colin Hartman, and McRoberts, and McSwain, the lineup that we've talked about a lot, that I can't stand that lineup because of how limited those guys are offensively. And Robert puts the team on his back, scores 8 straight points. It might have been 10 straight points. And I thought probably some of the most confident looking shots that he took all year. And I'm thinking, okay, here we go. Robert's back. We're going to get on a roll. Things are going to be good. And then it all went downhill. And for the second straight game, he turns the ball over 6 times. So it's great that his shot seemed to be back a little bit, although he lost it again in the second half and just finished 2 for 7. But 12 turnovers in the last 80 minutes of basketball for Robert Johnson. I mean, we've been in his corner. We continue to be in his corner. Obviously, he's getting a lot of minutes because of what he's done on the defensive end and how hard he's working. But man, he did not seem like a player really locked in tonight with some of the decisions he was making, especially with his ball handling and his passing.
Yeah, I mean, he had 13 points. I'm not sure at what point it was. I mean, he had 10 points probably 6-8 minutes into the game, and finished with 17. He just disappeared in stretches. He got those 4 in the second half at the end when nothing really mattered at that point. Yeah, he's just completely careless with the basketball, and really even seemed defensively where I think he'd gotten a lot of credit. I mean, he was on the receiving end of a number of those wide open threes where he just wasn't getting out to shooters, and just stretches where I thought he and Newkirk as senior guards were just kind of out there, but not really contributing anything. And I think Archie struggled to find guys who would give him something, because Devontae was up and down at times. Al struggled a little bit. Newkirk wasn't playing well. You kind of got to a point where I don't know who you were going to play at the guard position. But yeah, I thought Robert Johnson really just disappeared at that point, where like you said, he kind of put the team on his back there, went on a personal 8-0 run to really kind of break him out of the, they played well in the first couple minutes, had a rough stretch. His 8-0 run really got the momentum back for them. And then he just disappeared. And so many of the turnovers are just completely careless of not paying attention to a guy coming up behind him, and he took a number of shots, some runners that were essentially turnovers. So he probably would have had closer to 10 turnovers if you count some of those. I mean, that stretch that you mentioned where it was 40-36 in the second half, he took a really kind of wild runner that led to a run out. Nobody was really back on defense, led to a run out for IPFW. And then Devontae came down, made a turnover that led to a layup. And I think IU got the lead one more time from that point forward, and that was on the very next possession to Duran. And so, it was a pretty poor performance, and I think everybody felt the same way about Robert after how well he played, how well he shot the ball in the second half against Notre Dame. And seeing him come out that way, I agree with you that he seemed really confident. But I think, like so many of the guys, he just got sped up so much in the first half by the way that Fort Wayne wanted to play. And these guys, it was very much like the way they were playing last year. They just got so fast and got going too quick and turned the ball over. Newkirk fell into that in the first half, where made a couple nice moves, couldn't finish. He's just going too fast. And, they got sucked into everything that Fort Wayne wanted to do in the game, including the shots that they wanted IU to take, because, again, we can look at this game and say, 2-point shooting percentage for IU is pretty darn good in both halves. But, you shot 11 of your 33 first half shots from 3-point range, and you shot 13 of your 35 second half shots from 3-point range, and you made 4. for the game. It's, this team can get hot at times, but it's not going to be how they win games. And they have to learn that because they, fell into that habit and got into a shooting contest with a team that, was hot, and they were hot because they were giving them wide open looks. And IU's not going to beat people in a shooting contest this year. They're just not.
Yeah, and look, this is going to be an issue that we're going to have to deal with all year. I mean, like you said, and like Kyle mentioned in our chat, you only got 4 guards. Someone has to play. And, Robert has been maddeningly inconsistent. We know that Josh Newkirk is maddeningly inconsistent. Devontae Green is maddeningly inconsistent. And Al Durham is a freshman. And so he's going to be inconsistent, and he's limited with what he can give you offensively. So, look, we'd love to give some of these minutes to Rob Finney and Demezy Anderson and Justin Hunter, but, or Jerome Hunter, but they're not on the roster yet. So somebody has to play guard, and you've got to win these games that are coming up. And so, we'll get into this, and we'll talk about, how much responsibility does Archie have for a game like this? And obviously he's got some, but also I don't know exactly what he can do with the guard rotation. I mean, he's got to be able to rely on Robert Johnson, and Robert Johnson as a senior has to be better than this. It's not Archie's fault that Robert Johnson comes out and turns it over 6 times, 2 straight games. It's not. Robert was here for the Fort Wayne game last year. If anybody should be focused, it should be him as a senior. So that kind of stuff from an upperclassman like that is just unacceptable. And it's absolutely no surprise that the entire team struggled with turnovers on a night when your senior leader had 4 more turnovers than anybody else. I mean, he's a guy who sets the tone. And tonight, he just didn't set a very good tone. And I don't know what else Archie could do in that situation. And, in a lot of ways, a lot of the struggles Indiana had were guard driven tonight. And I just don't know where else he could have turned.
Yeah, it's, some of the post-game quotes are coming out now. There was one that Mike Miller just tweeted out. Archie said, "I thought we played selfishly offensively. It got contagious." I mean, I think that sums it up pretty well. I mean, those... Yeah. It was, hey, I'm going to go match this guy shot for shot instead of really getting the ball to the guys who needed to score in the positions where they could score. And I think some of that, in some ways, Robert making all those shots at the beginning, I don't know if that was, a bad thing for him, because he took a couple, I don't know if they're probably not quite heat check variety, but he took a couple, threes that weren't really the same kinds of ones that he hit early in the game. And really, I think kind of let himself get pulled into those kinds of things. And then in the second half, once Fort Wayne started, draining threes, it just seemed like IU thought that they were going to shoot their way back into the game, and just, it wasn't happening. I mean, the best thing they had going for them was the fact that they had gotten Fort Wayne in foul trouble, and they really didn't take full advantage of that. Not reasons, not to mention the fact they couldn't make free throws very well again either.
All right, coming up on the assembly call, I'm going to point out tonight's meaningful moments that you might have missed. We'll go inside the numbers also. That's next here on the assembly call. Stick with us. You are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's dumbfounding 92-72 loss to Fort Wayne tonight at Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall. Andy, let's talk about some meaningful moments that folks might have missed. And I'm pretty sure one of these you're going to agree with, and maybe want to talk about yourself, because I saw you mention it on Twitter as well. But you think back, and the last 8 minutes of the game, it felt so helpless. It just kind of felt like playing out the string, because Fort Wayne, had essentially put the game away. But there were some opportunities in the second half for Indiana to get back into it. And we mentioned Indiana led 40-36 at one point. Then they just had a flurry of turnovers. Fort Wayne makes a bunch of shots, and all of a sudden you look up and it's 53-44. And it's like, what just happened? But still at that point, now you've just got to kind of grit it out. Okay, let's get back into this game and kind of get going. And it looked like they might. It's 53-44. Juwan Morgan got it down low. He missed it. He grabbed the offensive board. He got fouled. He kind of slams the ball down. You see Josh McRoberts yelling, "Let's go." And I kind of felt at that point, all right, here we go. We're going to get this thing back. Fort Wayne went on to then miss a 3. Newkirk then found Morgan inside, and so it's 53-48. And so you've taken a punch from Fort Wayne, you've got it back to 5, and you're thinking, here we go. And then what happens after that? Fort Wayne goes down, drains a 3, right? And then I think then they made another bucket. It's 58-51. Juwan missed the front end of a 1-and-1, and then Conchar makes a 3, and all of a sudden it's 61-51. So you got it to 5, but then you couldn't get a stop. You couldn't get another bucket, and it's 61-51. And then a couple possessions after that, Robert Johnson made one of his terrible passes. It was an entry pass to Juwan Morgan that might have been the worst entry pass and the laziest entry pass I've ever seen. Fort Wayne takes it the other way for one of their many points off turnovers, and all of a sudden it's 67-53. Then they make another three, and it's 70-53. All right, so here again, now they've opened up a 17-point lead, but Indiana battled back a little bit, and they got it to 70-57, and you kind of felt like, okay, now maybe there's a last gasp here that Indiana can have, and then, Andy, you'll remember this play. Weir drives in, misses a tough shot. We have three guys around the ball. I know Juwan was there. I know Duran was there. I think Devontae was the other guy.
I think Newkirk was the other guy, actually.
Or maybe Newkirk. Morgan even gets his hands on the ball, but Weir ends up getting it, scoring at 72-57, and then that was basically it. And then you're just kind of playing out the string. So, I thought those stretches and those particular moments when it was 53-48, and then again when it was 70-57, if Indiana was going to make a comeback, that's where it needed to happen. And in the Notre Dame game, that's where Indiana was making plays and getting themselves back into it. Tonight, there just wasn't enough fight. There wasn't enough focus. And the opposition was ready to take advantage, and that was all she wrote, and it turned into a 20-point loss.
Yeah, I mean, that play during that stretch, I mean, IU had started to get a little bit of momentum. I mean, who knows? I don't know that anybody felt super confident they would come back, but you really had a chance where you go down and you make another shot there. You've reeled off 6 in a row. Crowd starts to get into it, and you let the smallest guy on the floor outwork you for a rebound. And then, compounding that was like he didn't score. He pulled the ball back out, and then Devontae just let Scott just drive right by him for an easy layup, and nobody was able to step in. And, then Newkirk follows that up by taking a bad 3-pointer. I mean, any 3-pointer in the second half was bad, I suppose, but, it takes a bad 3-pointer and it just snowballed from there. And I mean, it felt like so many things, that we saw last year where it wasn't, one bad play. It wasn't one bad play and then it was done. It was one bad play led to 5 more bad plays, and one defensive breakdown led to Fort Wayne scoring on, 6 or 7 straight possessions, where even when IU's offense got rolling a little bit in that kind of that first stretch you mentioned, they couldn't stop anybody. So it didn't actually do them any good. And they were trading 2s for 3s essentially at that point. So, just at no point, could they play well enough defensively for long enough to really get over the hump. And I think that's where, when you look at how good a team like Notre Dame can be offensively and how well IU played against them, it's almost unfathomable how poorly they were defensively tonight. But I guess it shouldn't be that much of a surprise, because it's exactly how they played against Indiana State. If you swap jerseys, you wouldn't have known the difference between the games, other than the fact that it was a month later in the season.
Yeah. So let's go inside the numbers. And the first number that I want to hit is Juwan Morgan. And this will give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about his game, because this will go down in the books as a double-double for Juwan, and the stats don't look terrible. I mean, he had 14 points, although he was 6 of 14 from the field, which is far, far less efficient than he usually is. And a big part of that is because he jacked up 3 threes, a couple of them late when everybody was just kind of jacking up threes when all hope and focus had been totally lost. But 14 points, he grabbed 9 offensive rebounds, so really battled in there, had a couple of nice block shots, but also turned it over a couple times. Here's what I want to say about Juwan, and obviously I want to get your thoughts, Andy. I thought early in the game he looked weird to me, and I don't know if he was tired. I don't know if he was hurt. I don't think he looked like himself. And I'm 1,000 miles away. I don't know what that is, and maybe if someone who was there, if they had a similar thought, they can let me know. But I didn't think he quite looked right. And then I thought, kind of there at the end of the game, he really padded those rebound numbers, especially, probably when he shouldn't have even been in the game. I mean, if I had a kind of a beef with Archie, and maybe, he wanted the top guys to have to stay out there and endure the embarrassment of playing out the string in this game. But I would have much preferred Juwan be off the floor, because he's such an important part of this team and so prone to injury. So I didn't want to see him out there, and he ended up, kind of getting a bunch of rebounds there at the end. But while he had some flashes, and there's a lot of guys that deserve more criticism than him, I just thought something looked off with him. And again, I don't know if he's nursing a little bit of an injury. We know he had to leave the floor in that Notre Dame game before he came back, but of course he scored like 18 points in the final 9 minutes, so he certainly looked healthy, but something just didn't quite look right with him tonight. And I guess maybe that's indicative of how something didn't look right for the whole team.
Yeah, I mean, he did look just tired in spots, and nothing ever really came out about whatever caused him to go to the locker room in the second half of that game. And people talked about like a hamstring or something like that. So I don't really know. Yeah, there was one time in the first half when he kind of made a weird movement, or I feel like he grabbed at something. But yeah, I mean, I thought he started the game, kind of like the team started the game really well, and I think got a little bit out of the rhythm of things by having to sit out so long with foul trouble. But even in the beginning of the second half, I thought they seemed to come out really intent in those first few possessions on getting the ball to Juwan and Duran, and then that went by the wayside pretty quickly. I'd agree with you. Some of the rebounding numbers, I think. Probably the most frustrating part for me was the fact that he was doing a good job of getting to the line, and he, missed, missed 4 of his 6 free throw attempts, which, even the team got to the line 19 times, only made 12.
And that suggests a focus issue.
Yeah. So that was the part that really stood out to me for him. I think defensively he seemed to be, had a couple of blocks. I think he was struggling to, IPFW plays a really small lineup, or Fort Wayne, I guess, plays a small lineup, and but again, just felt like, and kind of the same thing with Duran, and we keep talking about, oh, this isn't a good matchup. This isn't a good matchup. Well, at some point, IU needs to take advantage of the fact that they have bigger players and more skilled players. It can't always be that IU has to adjust to everybody else. So that's kind of where I hesitate to even say with Juwan, well, it wasn't a great, some of the matchups made him guard, smaller players and guard on the perimeter more than he had been. I just thought there were a lot of missed opportunities to kind of take advantage of what advantage IU did have. The 2-point shooting reflects that, but they just didn't shoot enough, quite honestly. And the breakdown of shots is just not where this team, the way it shoots the ball, needs to break out where they're shooting.
You're listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's 20-point loss to Fort Wayne. Right now we're going inside the numbers. So, look, obviously you look at some of the numbers. The turnovers is the biggest story. Indiana turns it over on 24.5% of possessions, 18 total, led by Robert Johnson, 6. And what did the points off turnovers ended up being a 29-7 advantage for Fort Wayne. So in a game that Fort Wayne won by 20, they won points off turnovers by 22. I mean, sometimes it's not that simple, but in this game, it was kind of that simple, because a lot of the 3-pointers that they got, were off of broken plays or off of, live ball turnovers that they were able to get and then get out in transition and get open looks. And then, it just compounded itself, because now Indiana's getting down. This is not a team that is built to play from behind with that kind of a deficit, because it's not a good 3-point shooting team. And then it is really hard, to go inside to Duran and kind of have the patience that you need to have to really take advantage of what you're doing from 2-point field goal percentage. So, all of those numbers just worked against Indiana. Obviously, the other big one is that Fort Wayne shoots 56.7%, yet another team that shoots lights out from 3. And look, part of that is teams are getting hot against Indiana, and part of it is as Indiana struggles to learn this pack line defense, and we know that one of the weaknesses of it, and I guess one of the last things that comes, is that ability to close out on shooters and be able to do everything that you're trying to do in terms of packing it in and not giving up the easy looks down low. But then you've also got to be able to recover out to shooters, and that's something that Indiana has done a better job of in games like the Notre Dame game, when they're totally engaged, they're playing with great effort and energy. Tonight they weren't. It showed up in the numbers.
Well, I think what you saw them do a few times when the big guy, Carl, I think was his name, hit those threes on the perimeter. I mean, they would basically put everybody else on one side of the floor, have those guys over in a ball screen. And then, with the way that IU has been hedging on those, he just slips over in the corner. There's no way for anybody to rotate and help. And every time, whoever, IU's big guy was that was guarding him, didn't get over to him. And the other part of that is IU didn't really adjust to the way they're, playing in those situations. They weren't switching those. They were, continuing to try to do what they were doing, which was pretty effective against Notre Dame. And they, did a better job of helping and recovering. But, Fort Wayne kind of took that away based on, where other players were positioned. So but again, so many of the threes were just wide open. I mean, that accounted for a few of them. And I think most of the ones that Carl took were of that variety, but otherwise, I mean, there are plenty of open shots to go around. I mean, of the 30 that they took, I mean, yeah, I don't remember a whole lot where it seemed like they were closely guarded and hit one in somebody's face. I think the number of those is pretty small out of the 17 that they made. So
no, I actually think the 3-point defense was better against Indiana State than it was tonight. Because I remember in that game, it felt like there were at least hands and faces on some of the shots. Tonight, guys are just standing wide open, and that's an effort and a focus thing. Obviously, there's some game planning stuff and the way that Fort Wayne plays, and they're going to get themselves some of those open looks. But part of that is guys just not communicating, being a step slow physically and a step slow mentally, and it adds up to a lot of the fake hustle, as Coach Tonsoni calls it, where guys are just kind of running past 3-point shooters. You certainly saw a lot of that tonight, but that is not a closeout.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, I mean, you look at those 18 turnovers, but it's 13 steals for Fort Wayne. So those are live ball type turnovers that leads a lot to, you're not resetting your defense, you're not anything. It's just everybody's kind of scrambling in transition, and IU really struggles to identify and pick up shooters in those scenarios, and have for a while on the season. So that was one. I mean, IU had 20 offensive rebounds that only led to 19 second chance points. That was another one that jumped out at me. And I mean, the assist numbers in total, Fort Wayne 19 assists on 31 makes, and IU had 10 assists on 28. So yeah, the 10 assists to 18 turnover, numbers are not gonna get it done for you too many nights. And so even on a night when IU, got to the free throw line a decent amount, really got in the bonus pretty early, failed to take advantage of it, couldn't really make free throws. And again, you shoot 55% on twos, and yet you take 24 of your 68 shots from 3-point range in a team that doesn't shoot the ball well. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Even in the second half, I think IU was 11 of shot 50%. So even that wasn't as good. 11 of 22 on twos. And, you're taking 13 3-pointers in that game. You're just in a 3-point shooting contest. And that allows things to snowball quickly, because some of those shots were poor. They ricocheted out, and then it's another run out, which is just like a turnover at that point. And I mean, I think if you throw in all the bad shots that really were essentially turnovers that cost you those additional transition opportunities, you're probably looking at 25 that you'd kind of chalk up in that column of things.
Yep. Okay, coming up on the assembly call, there's lots of other storylines to hit and break down. We need to talk about them. We got to talk about Deron Davis. We got to talk about some of the other individuals. And Andy, I think we need to just talk big picture about the roster and just what we have here, because I think, we're probably going to end up seeing more of the same this season to what we've seen over the last 80 minutes of basketball. So let's talk about that too and more coming up here on the assembly call. Stick with us. You are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Catch us live immediately following every IU basketball game and every Thursday night on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. And you can also view all of our live broadcasts right on our homepage at assemblycall.com. I am Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms, trying to make sense of another Indiana beatdown at home to an in-state school that shoots lights out because Indiana allows them to shoot lights out. That's what we saw tonight in this Fort Wayne game, essentially a reprisal of the Indiana State game, but in so many ways, so much worse. Let's talk a little bit about Deron, Andy, and then let's pick up whatever other individuals that you want to talk about. But he, to me, is the other really interesting guy because, I thought we really saw a guy kind of announce himself on the national stage against Duke, against their powerful front line. He scores 16 points. He's 6 of 7 from the field. He was strong. He was tough inside. And then, he struggles against Michigan, as everyone does. He only scores 4 points, but bounces back with decent efforts against Iowa and Louisville, 13 points and 14 points in those games, although his efficiency wasn't quite as good. And then we play these 2 games against Notre Dame and Fort Wayne, and he scores a total of 9 points. He's only 4 of 9 from the field. And while I thought at times he rebounded better, especially on the defensive end than what we've seen, so that's at least a plus, and he's had a few block shots. Otherwise, he's just really struggled to get going. And it hasn't really been about foul trouble. He's only had a total of 3 fouls in these 2 games. It's just felt like he's struggled to get himself involved. And when he has gotten it down low, and Coach Tonsoni has mentioned this a couple times on Twitter, mentioned in the chat, he's double clutching on his shots. He's not going up strong like what we've seen. And I don't quite know what to attribute that to, except that maybe, we talk about shooters slumps, and I guess maybe you don't think about a post guy going through slumps, but he seems more tentative down low. He's not the assertive guy that we saw in that Duke game. And it's frustrating because obviously, he can be put in mismatches on defense, and that stinks, and that limits, sometimes, how much he can play, especially when you want to go with the defensive lineup. But like you said, why are we not on the other end turning it into an advantage? Because he's so skilled. That was part of this team's identity as recently as a few weeks ago, and now it really doesn't feel like it is anymore. And granted, maybe part of that is the emergence of Juwan Morgan and the focus on getting him going down low, but this team has to ride both of those guys. It can't just be one of them. And so I think this has been a really concerning 80 minutes for Duran, for him not to get going in either one of these games. And I don't quite know how to explain it. I just know that it's got to get better moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like one of those things where you could sit every game and make an excuse and say, well, this wasn't a good matchup. I mean, talked about that with Michigan, and Ryan talked about that on the post game after the Notre Dame game. Could probably make the same. I think Seth Davis was among the many nonsensical things that he was saying. Was saying the same thing about it tonight. I mean, at some point though, you have to be able to it's ultimately a mismatch on the other side, and if IU and Davis aren't able to put themselves in a position to take advantage of that, then that becomes pretty unfortunate at that point, because a lot was kind of put on his plate at the beginning of the season, and it feels like too many games they're having to turn in a different direction to be able to try to get offense and to be able to try to figure out how to play defensively with him on the court. And so it is a struggle. It is a concern. We've talked about how well some of those lineups with Morgan and Hartman, have played together at various times. And I agree that that's good that IU has that flexibility, but they're really relying a lot on Duran Davis, far too much for him to, in a game they really didn't get into foul trouble, which had been, kind of the issue in the past. We had one foul in this game, and they couldn't keep him on the floor, or didn't want to keep him on the floor for one reason or another. And I would agree with you that is kind of a growing concern at that point. But they go in stretches where you can tell they come out of either a timeout or in this case, kind of out of halftime, really tried to work on getting him the ball, and then kind of just go completely away from it in other stretches. There's just not that consistency with trying to get him involved. And I think that's on everybody. I don't think that's, just on the guards. I don't think it's just on him, but at some point you have to be able to use that to your advantage. It can't be every game, well, this just didn't work out, so we couldn't play him. That can't be the refrain. He has too much potential to be good to kind of talk yourself into a reason that you can't play him every game.
Yeah. Other individuals that stood out, Devontae Green was not good, but he was probably the best guard overall for Indiana. I mean, he had 9 points. He did have 4 assists, made some things happen with some steals and some blocks. Obviously, had some really poor shots in terms of his shot selection, and was only 2 for 9. So that certainly reflects that. Had a couple of turnovers, like almost everybody did. Colin Hartman had 4 points, did have 12 rebounds. So, he and Juwan Morgan really, they did a lot of work, especially on the offensive glass. Although the problem is, as you mentioned before, Indiana not able to turn those offensive rebounds into points. And that what hurt from Hartman is he was 0 for 3 from downtown. And, again, on this roster, he has got to be a guy who comes in and makes outside shots. This team just doesn't have enough guys who can shoot. And that's something they have to be able to rely on him for. And so, for him to go 0 for 3, that's obviously disappointing. And then, we are now seeing the continued regression of Indiana's freshmen, Al Durham and Justin Smith, 2 guys who played such a huge role early in the season and really looked like they would be big parts of the rotation. Their minutes are getting squeezed more and more. Al only plays 13 minutes tonight. He wasn't terrible. I mean, he was one of the few guys who didn't have a turnover. He just... right now, he's not bringing a lot to the table. He's not taking a lot off because he's not turning the ball over, but I thought he struggled defensively, isn't able to do a ton offensively, had no assists, and I think for a guy that you're looking to be a primary ball handler when he's on the court, he is not comfortable enough yet and or adept yet at the college level to create opportunities for his teammates, and he's not a good enough shooter on his own to score points for himself. So, I think he's now struggling to kind of find minutes and find where he fits. And Justin Smith got in there and, he only had 1 turnover. He could have had 2 because I think the first possession he got the ball, he got it up at the top of the key, took, a quick dribble and dribbled it off his foot. So he kind of struggled to get going. So, any comments on those other guys before we move to some kind of bigger picture talk?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both just going through a little bit of the same thing where they got off to a good start. Things, I don't know, maybe saying it came easy to them in the beginning is overstating it, but I think they saw success early. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And now some of that, they're struggling, and some of that doubt is starting to creep in a little bit where, just kind of feel like they're overthinking things out there, that kind of making the simple play, which is what I think Al did a really good job of doing initially when he was, not turning the ball over, and really even defensively making, not closing out of control, just trying to, kind of keep his man in front of him. I thought, kind of making the simple play was one of the things that he really excelled at. And now you can, it feels like you can kind of see him thinking through that. And then, with Justin, clearly is losing some minutes because Hartman has come back. And I don't know if that's turned into a scenario where, hey, if I don't go out here and really try to do something, I don't know how long I've got. That's, the rope is a lot longer for Al because of what we talked about before, with there not being a lot of guards on the roster. It's not necessarily the case with Justin. And I think, McRoberts playing more minutes has impacted both those guys because he's a little bit of a, a swing player that you can play at that, kind of 3 position. So that may be a bit of a factor as well. But yeah, it's definitely been a struggle. I think we haven't seen Al be able to, kind of get to the rim as easily. That's something he was doing really well, was getting to the rim and being able to finish. You haven't seen much of that from him. I think people are, kind of backing off of him a little bit, trying to make him, make shots and go at him that way. So I think they're both just kind of working through their first, prolonged struggles in college and trying to figure out how to make that work. And, we'll see if they can work through it. I think, like I said, I think Al's got a better chance to do that simply because the minutes are going to be there, and how the seniors have really played. You can see an opportunity there to continue to get minutes, and that won't necessarily go away. I think it's a little bit harder as the front court gets a little more crowded, and Juwan continues to play really well. So need to get those guys out of it, because it really is getting to a point where you're getting things off the bench in the form of McRoberts and Hartman and Green to a certain extent. But yeah, I wonder how far off you are of one or more of those guys working their way into the starting lineup, and then what does that leave you on the bench?
Yeah. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's 92-72 loss to Fort Wayne. So let's talk about Archie Miller, because you lose a game like this by 20 points. Certainly the coach is not absolved from blame. But I wonder, where do we put the blame on Archie Miller? Because, look, I think we all know that this is a flawed roster. And for as well as Indiana shot in the second half against Notre Dame, I think Indiana made 7 of their last 11 three-pointers. And that was such a huge part of winning that game. Obviously, Juwan Morgan's play was tremendous, but Indiana finally shooting a high percentage from three-point range is what allowed them to get back into that game. Tonight, we reverted back to our worst shooting, going 4 for 24. And so, we know that there are limitations on this roster, and we know that we have some guys that have proven themselves in the past to be, not mentally strong, to be guys who are up one game, down another, can play with passion and energy when the lights are on and it's a big game, but maybe not bring that same focus and energy in a game like tonight. And those are veterans. And, a coach in his first year, how much can you really expect him to kind of be able to get through to those guys and get them going? And, and then you look at how this game went, and, are there decisions in there he could have made? And certainly when you listen to what he said in the post-game press conference after Notre Dame, he was ready to look ahead to Fort Wayne. He, I think, understood that Fort Wayne won this game last year. He understood how hard it was going to be to come back 48 hours later. I have to assume he got that message across. And so I think the coach always has the ultimate responsibility. And so I do want to lay some blame at Archie Miller for this. But in terms of like how to quantify it or how much or what specifically, I don't really know how to describe it, because every time I think about what frustrates me most and who I really think is at fault in this game, I come back to the players in this one. I really do. I feel like this is a game, as you mentioned, where every flaw of the roster and every flaw of particular individuals came to a head in one game. And maybe where we saw in that Notre Dame game, what happens when, you get a lot of guys playing well, even though some guys didn't play well in that game. Tonight, you saw what happens when it all goes awry. And I don't know that there was anything specifically Archie could have done differently that would have changed the result? Am I being too easy on him?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, like I said, it felt like a game where you want to see somebody just go nuts and yank everybody off the floor. And then you turn and you look around and you say, well, who in the hell would you put in based on how guys had played? I think that's where, maybe is where he was. And I don't really know. I think that was, I don't really know. I mean, he tried to take timeouts. He sat guys down. I thought he had a shorter rope with Robert Johnson tonight that he probably had at other points during the season when everybody's clamoring for him to come off the floor. I thought there were times that he got taken out right after making a poor decision.
He only played 31 minutes tonight. That's the lowest I remember in a while for him.
And at some point, I was looking through some different things on Twitter, and I think Dave Novak, he pointed out, IPFW or Fort Wayne had 14 of their 17 threes came from three guys. So you mean to tell me you can't identify and really focus in on those three guys? I mean, at some point, if you're a player, who's torching you at some point, and you continue to let those guys get open. So yeah, I'm cognizant of trying not to give Archie a complete pass on this because it was obviously an incredibly poor performance, and he certainly took some of the blame for that after the game. It sounded like, kind of talked about not having their attention in the way that he needed to or wanted to. But man, it's just hard to watch. Crimson Cast had a pretty good series of tweets. One of them was, this team has an inflated opinion of themselves, can't be bothered to get up for the little games, but gives effort against the big boys, aren't anywhere close to good enough to do that. And you listen to the things that the guys on the team said. It's like, well, I think that is why I thought, while certainly there was the opportunity for a letdown, I thought that was mitigated to a certain extent by who they were playing. Because again, this is what at times would kind of frustrated me when things started to kind of turn the corner under the Crean era, when guys on the team were still there who had kind of gotten their brains beat in by everybody for a couple years, and then would overlook, a lesser opponent. That would really frustrate me with those teams. I think one of the losses at Nebraska, that was really frustrating at that point. It's like, these are the kinds of teams who just destroyed you. Like, you were that team. And in this game, it's kind of like, for those guys who were part of that last year, who just got their, who got beat in that game, how do you allow yourself to overlook the same team again? It felt like at times that, because of Archie's comments after the game, you kind of mentioned that he realized what kind of game it was. Like, he wasn't even here. The guy who wasn't here shouldn't have a better understanding of the importance of not overlooking that than a whole bunch of guys that were. And when you really look at the lineups that were out there when the game turned, as I tried to keep it, I mean, it was juniors and seniors on the court. I mean, there was one stretch where IU got outscored by 8 points. It went between substitutions. It went from 58-51 to 70-55, and you got 3 seniors and a junior out there. So at some point, having an experienced team apparently doesn't amount to a whole lot if those are guys who are out there and are being the gatekeepers at the time when you're just letting everybody go. So I think we'll probably end up, some people will say we're not being hard enough on Archie, but I do struggle to say, look, you've got experienced guys out there who are on a team that lost to this team, who are also on this team that got blown out at home by another in-state school, and they just rolled over. It for the most part, as they were there. I mean, there was a play toward the end, Robert Johnson and Hartman are back, and they basically just let the guy drive right between the two of them and get a layup. I struggle to get too mad at Archie for that, although you'd love to see what buttons he could push. I just don't know if I was in the same position. I honestly don't know what you would do, short of like, I'm just going to go play walk-ons and see what happens there, because otherwise you were at a real struggle to figure out somebody that was playing well for long enough to really go with and say, hey, I'm going to teach these guys a lesson by leaving guy X on the court, because I don't know that you would have come up with 5 players that you would have put out there.
Just let McRoberts play. Yeah. My team's on the floor. It's Zach McRoberts.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's where we are here in this Indiana basketball season.
seems about right.
Yeah, seems about right. All right. Coming up in our final segment of this edition of the Assembly Call, we're going to hand out our game balls. That'll be fun. We will look ahead to Indiana's next opponent, Tennessee Tech, coming up on Thursday, and then we will deliver our final thoughts on this pretty just depressing loss to Fort Wayne. That is next here on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. You're listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms, and we are wrapping up our breakdown of Indiana's 92-72 loss to Fort Wayne tonight at Simon Scott Assembly Hall. And this is the point of the show where we hand out our game balls. And so, Andy, I will give you the first option at the game balls. Not a whole lot to choose from tonight.
Holy moly. Yeah, that's yeah, a lot of excellent choices. I guess I'll go with McRoberts, quite honestly. I think if you look back at guys who kind of kept up the same trajectory, I guess, from where they were in the Notre Dame game, I'd argue he's probably the only one that did that. I think Juwan did to a certain extent. I mean, for me, it was either Juwan or McRoberts. I know Robert Johnson led the team in scoring, but just was disappeared for far too long in the turnovers in a game when they needed somebody to step up and actually take care of the basketball were just too much. So I'll go with McRoberts. I mean, he was efficient, took 9 points on 4 shots, made both free throws, which was something other guys on the team couldn't do. Did have a couple turnovers, but I thought, at least from an effort standpoint, was making a lot of the same plays as he was before. But the reality is that there are likely not going to be too many times when he's one of the guys getting the game ball that you're gonna feel like the game had a positive outcome. And again, You've got all these veteran guys who everybody kind of takes a night on and a night off at some point, as you guys kind of mentioned after the Notre Dame game, where, hey, you did this in spite of not getting performances from these guys. Margin for error is still not large for a team that can't shoot the ball, and for tonight couldn't take care of it. And so you get yourself in a position where he's one of the, among the leading scorers and really one of few choices for a guy who really played fairly well from start to finish. There's not going to be too many great games to be had when you're going to be talking about things like that afterward.
Yeah, I have a feeling that I'm going to end up giving mine to McRoberts too, because I think Juwan Morgan is the obvious other choice, because again, he did have a double-double, and you look at that, 9 offensive rebounds, and it's like, well, hey, you were lauding Zach McRoberts for 9 offensive rebounds in the Notre Dame game or whatever, or maybe it's 7 offensive rebounds in the Notre Dame game. Shouldn't Juwan Morgan get that same praise? But a couple things. Number one, I think Juwan Morgan, look, you're the National Player of the Year. You're graded on a bit of a different curve now. And I don't think he lived up to the expectations that he has to have now as the go-to guy and the leader. Because I know what the numbers say. I didn't think he played all that well. And I think, you look at the plus minus, a flawed stat in a single game situation, but Indiana was minus 30 with him on the court. And that was by far the worst. And I don't think it was an accident. I think his numbers were soft tonight. Outside of a few stretches where he had some nice moves down low, I thought defensively he was slow. I didn't think, he had a lot of focus, which you can tell from the 2 for 6 from the line. So I don't think Juwan Morgan played well tonight, and I think it would actually be kind of an insult to him and how much he's grown as a player to give him a game ball for this performance, because I don't think he earned it. And I think he was part of the problem tonight, not part of the solution. Robert Johnson's the team's leading scorer with 17 points, but he turned it over 6 times. And we've talked about how poorly he played. So, the other guy that you could look at is Freddie McSwain, who came in, didn't really put up much in terms of stats, had a rebound and a turnover, but he's the only guy on the night who actually had a positive plus minus. So when he was on the court, at least Indiana was scoring. And again, part of that is because Robert Johnson went nuts shooting during that stretch when Freddie was in there. But at least he didn't do anything to blatantly contribute to losing. So in limited minutes, but that's where we are tonight. And so I'm going to agree with you. I'm going with Zach McRoberts. He was the guy that I mentioned in the banner moment. I think he's the guy tonight who, and I even think, Zach wasn't quite as on as he was against Notre Dame. He had some uncharacteristic bad decisions. He had a play. He drove in. He turned the ball over. And you could see he kind of threw his hands up in the air. He was frustrated with himself and wasn't hustling back. And you could see Archie yelling at him to get back on defense. So even Zach kind of got caught up in the moment and got frustrated and wasn't quite as locked in and energetic as we've seen. It was just that kind of night. But for the most part, he was the one guy who kind of brought the energy and brought the effort, and he scored 9 points, which was good to see. So hopefully that's a building block for him. But for everybody, and because I think there were some positives to take from the game for him on the offensive end. But for everybody else, I mean, I don't want to say that you just forget about this game because you need to try and learn some lessons from it. But my goodness, there really isn't a whole lot to build on from this game moving forward. I mean, you've got to play at a completely different level moving forward, when you start playing against Big Ten competition. And the thing is, Andy, you look at the next couple games. I mean, Fort Wayne is obviously a unique matchup because they've got one of the Scott brothers. And whenever you're playing Bryson or Brenton Scott, those guys are going to go off on you and play at like an all-American level, and that, these teams are going to play at much, much higher than what they played coming in, because Fort Wayne was like 180th or something coming into the game, not a real high-level team. But because of that and because of what they did last year, and you've got a talented guy like John Conchar who's on NBA radar screens. So I mean, they've got some things where they can really take advantage of Indiana. Indiana's next two opponents, Tennessee Tech and Youngstown State, this is kind of more of a lot of the opponents that we saw come through last year, the last few years. The Youngstown State, I think they're in the 300s. Tennessee Tech is in the 200s. So, let's talk about these teams, Tennessee Tech in particular, what they bring in and what we can really learn about this Indiana team. Obviously, one thing that we hope to learn is that they play with much better focus and effort on Thursday, and I think that'll be big, as Archie talked about not having the guys' attention. Does he have their attention for that Tennessee Tech game? Do they put forth a much better effort? But otherwise, are either of these teams really going to be able to challenge Indiana in the same way that a team like Fort Wayne was able to?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit tough to answer that tonight. After the way they played, I mean, Tennessee Tech is 8-4. A couple of those wins have come against non-Division I schools. They did win at New Mexico, who's not all that good this year, and really haven't. The best team they played is TCU, and they got beat by 37 on the road. Otherwise, they haven't played a top 100 KenPom team, as I kind of look down here now. So, haven't fared particularly well from an experience standpoint. They're, according to however Pomeroy calculates it, they're the third most experienced team they've got. As you look down the guys who use their possessions, it's almost all juniors and seniors. Although, as I talked about tonight, that maybe isn't always a good thing, I guess, depending upon how things go. They come into the game 227th in 3-point shooting, so look for them to hit over 50% from there. That should be great. Actually, no, that's not true. Oh dear God, I looked at it wrong. I looked at the defense. They're actually ranked.
Oh crap, they're good.
They're actually ranked 75th in the nation in 3-point shooting. So,
oh boy,
God help us all. So that should go well. I mean, defensively, their efficiency numbers are really ugly. Have given up some big 2-point shooting numbers. So hopefully IU can kind of stick with that game plan of pounding the ball inside. Have turned it over a lot offensively. So that's one, I mean, again, there's no circumstance under which this should be a close game, but given how tonight's game went, I don't think anything is a given. And Youngstown State is pretty bad. They're currently 330th in KenPom. So that's one that should be, really the easiest, certainly the easiest remaining game on the roster, and one of the easier ones that was on the non-con schedule to begin with. So that one probably a little bit less to be concerned with than the Tennessee Tech game. But at this point, with how this team has allowed other teams to come in and get comfortable shooting the basketball with wide open looks for a team that apparently has some 3-point firepower, that should give at least a little uneasiness. Again, not a game that IU should lose by any stretch of the imagination, but just when you start looking at how the stats line up, that's the biggest area for concern at this point.
Yeah, and you know what? You're smart. Your more muted confidence than my clear overconfidence, I think, is the smarter tack to take here. Because I mean, Indiana's lost 2 games at home now to teams ranked 160th and 174th, and like you said, Tennessee Tech is an experienced team. They can make threes, and I just got done talking about how this team, it really seems like kind of a front-running team. They get up for these big games, but for the games that aren't so big, they struggle. So hopefully we see much more of the Indiana that we saw against South Florida, Arkansas State, and Eastern Michigan, where Indiana really, against teams that they should beat, they did it. They won by 17, and then they won by 20. Hopefully we see more of that than the Indiana team that we saw against Indiana State, Howard, and Fort Wayne, where, on balance over those 120 minutes, Indiana was basically awful. So we'll see. So I guess you lose a game like tonight, unfortunately, it kind of makes that game more interesting, because now I think everybody's going to be really curious to see how Indiana bounces back. What kind of mentality do they have? But I mean, I think based on what we've seen here in the early part of this season, it's just going to be a roller coaster ride. I saw another tweet Crimson Cast had that, be prepared for this Indiana team to beat Michigan State and then lose to Illinois this year. And, I mean, based on what we've seen, that really wouldn't be all that shocking. And it shows you, I think, the flaws of this roster, the overall lack of maturity, and just the disconnect between especially the upperclassmen who are here, guys who have played in one system and now are really having to learn a new one and get comfortable in it on a game in, game out basis. And, when things are going well and shots are falling, it looks okay. But, I think you see games like tonight, and when you get tired and when things don't go well, you tend to revert back to some of those old habits. And we're only 12 games into this season, and clearly Indiana hasn't kicked a lot of those old bad habits that, plagued the team last year and are plaguing them again this year when they don't play well. So you're listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. One quick final reminder, because you are an Assembly Call listener, you get 15% off your entire order at HoosierProud.com. So if you want officially licensed IU gear, one of our Assembly Call logo T-shirts, or one of Hoosier Proud's unique Indiana-inspired designs, visit HoosierProud.com. Use the promo code Assembly at checkout. That's HoosierProud.com, promo code Assembly for 15% off your entire order. I'm Jerod Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms, and we are finishing up our breakdown of Indiana's 92-72 loss to Fort Wayne, and that means it's time for last call. Andy, what kind of final profound statements do you have after another horrid night of basketball at Simon Scott Assembly Hall?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't even. It was, by any measure, it was a wildly disappointing performance from really any way you can look at it, from a just attention to detail, from a maturity, from a leadership standpoint, all those kinds of things. I mean, just terrible, particularly in the second half. And I think it probably is a good reality check for fans and players alike, that for as good as everybody felt after that Notre Dame game, a good reminder of how far there still is to go, and the kinds of challenges that this roster is going to have. I think that's frustrating because everybody wants to see that glimmer. It's no different than after the Duke game, when everybody kind of felt good, even in a loss, and they turned around and followed that up by playing really poorly against Michigan. And for whatever reason, this team just lacks the ability to deal with success and really build upon that. And, talking about how do you string together 40 minutes of good basketball, and they continue to struggle to do that, where they can play well in stretches, although the stretches were few and far between tonight. But it's, there's no way to sugarcoat how disappointing it was. And I think, while we talk about some of that probably does go on the coaching staff, I think it was really, this is the kind of thing that, under the vast majority of circumstances, if you have a top tier program with this kind of experience on it, I struggle to believe that you would see that kind of performance too often from a program that has the level of maturity and leadership that everybody would want and everybody would expect. But I think this is a good reality check of where this team and this roster is right now. Take whatever numbers you want aside, it was just a performance of guys who were either worn down or whatever you want to say, but for whatever reason, just did not come with the same intensity, did not come with the same fight that really led them to win the Notre Dame game and help them overcome mistakes that they made. Everybody walked away from that game saying, this was one that IU could have taken control of earlier, and they didn't. And they kind of won a little bit in spite of themselves, but they won in spite of themselves because they played so hard, and they continued to fight and really made things hard for the other team to score. Got their confidence from how they were playing defensively, and some of those shots did start to fall, as you said, toward the end of the game. I thought tonight was really the opposite. They kind of waited for good things to happen instead of manufacturing their own good luck or whatever you want to call it. And in the end, just gave up open shot after open shot, and instead of gaining confidence for themselves by playing well defensively, they gave Fort Wayne all the confidence they could ever need by allowing them to just light up the scoreboard and get so many open looks and knock them down. And you had guys who had hardly scored on the season for Fort Wayne, shooting it well, shooting it with confidence, because they knew that nobody was going to be there to really contest the shot. So just disappointing one that they'll need to put behind them quickly and see how they react. It feels a lot like a post-game show from last year where we would go and like, well, it'll be interesting to see how they react. And that'll be the best thing to take away, and the roller coaster analogy and all that. And it's, I think even for us, you feel like you're kind of past some of that stuff. And,
we're trying to psych ourselves up because we got to do a show after the next game.
Lo and behold, here's where we are, right back where it feels like we started from.
Yeah, we've been talking about the 3 P words, patience, perspective, and then hope for progress. And I think what was great about Saturday is we saw some progress, and we've been seeing it. Well, now I think we've really got to focus on the patience and perspective part. And I think it's easy. You win a game like that against Notre Dame, you feel like, okay, we're back, we're ready to roll. And, obviously Indiana got a big reality check here. Fans got a reality check. The coach got a reality check. The players got a reality check. But I think there's some members of the media who probably need a bit of a reality check too, and Pat Forty among them. I saw this tweet: IU fans ripped Tom Crean all last year, but he sure didn't lose by 21 at home to Indiana State and to 20 to Fort Wayne. Just stunning. This is true. Tom Crean didn't lose those games this year or last year because he didn't play both of those games, but he might have lost them this year because this is the roster that Tom Crean brought back. This flawed roster that can't shoot consistently, that has, guys who have proven to be mentally weak, at worst, I guess, inconsistent at best, if you want to just, use the most charitable adjective that you could. But those kind of tweets, which, seem to suggest maybe coaching wasn't the problem, really are just not taking a very clear-headed view of what's been going on with this program and the trends in the program and what Archie is now trying to reverse. And so, we kind of talked about, obviously, Archie does deserve some blame here. And for whatever reason, he didn't have the team's attention. And so, if he's got to, build better relationships or, figure out different ways to communicate, or maybe it's just not going to happen this year. Maybe seniors who have played under a different coach and aren't going to be part of the future are going to have a hard time buying in, game out. It's easy to buy in when Duke is coming to Simon Scott Assembly Hall, or when you're playing in the Crossroads Classic on national TV against Notre Dame. It's a little bit harder to to grit those things out and do it the right way in a game like this. And so, I think you lose a game like this, there's always going to be some really extreme reaction. And I don't think this is the time for it. I think we come on these post-game shows to kind of get all this stuff out of our system, to get frustrated, to let it out. And I think that's all well and good. But, to start, making a game like this a referendum on the new coaching staff, that's silly. I mean, it's silly in a lot of ways. It's just dumb. I mean, I think if you've watched this team play, you've seen the strides, you've seen the growth. You've seen in Indiana's best moments the imprint of Archie Miller. And I know I speak for myself, and I think a lot of IU fans when I say that's the kind of basketball that we want to be watching. And I think a lot of us have confidence that as we move forward, even with this season, that we'll see it more consistently. Not as much as we all want to, we know that, but we'll see it more consistently as Archie gets his own guys in and you start having freshmen who become sophomores under Archie Miller. Now you start to see that develop and you get it more consistently. But to expect it to be consistent after 12 games, I think that's probably unrealistic on anybody's part. And again, to make this a game like this, any kind of referendum on the new coaches, or to go back and I don't know, make a comment like that about Tom Crean just really seems silly, and seems like a guy like Pat Forty, who's been around, should know better. But anyway, and I guess that's kind of my final thought as we move forward is we get excited about the progress, and let's grasp onto those moments and let's really enjoy them and indulge in them, because I think there's going to be a lot of moments like that Notre Dame game in the future. But when we have moments like tonight, let's remember the patience and the perspective that we also have to have. And I think that will allow us to have a healthy mindset as we go through these games and go through this season and continue moving forward in the Archie Miller era, which I think most of us agree is going to be a very fruitful one. There's just going to be a lot of bumps and hiccups as we get through this first season, and probably some next year as well. But I still think, despite a 20-point loss at home to Fort Wayne, I still feel like the program is on the right track. They just took a bit of a detour tonight, and hopefully whatever lessons can be learned from it are learned, and we can move forward and be better for this game. it was too much like the Indiana State game for me to really have confidence that that's the case with this group, but that's the hope that I'm going to hang on to, and hopefully we see some better play on Thursday night. All right, that'll do it for us on this edition of the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Remember that our live broadcasts immediately following every IU game are always available on our homepage at assemblycall.com and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. And you can always catch up on demand anytime with our podcast. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And most importantly, go to assemblycall.com/join. Join our free email newsletter. You will get our 6-banner Sunday IU news roundups during the season and into the offseason. And, of course, you will get our post-game analysis emails sent the morning after every game. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you again on Thursday night. That game, obviously, the post-game show for Tennessee Tech, that will also double as Assembly Call Radio for the week, because we usually record that on Thursday nights, but we're just going to do it all in one this week. So we will talk to you Thursday night after Tennessee Tech. Hopefully it's a much more pleasant show than this one was. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.